What if you could build not one, but three thriving businesses and exit to a Fortune 500 firm, all while helping others do the same? Today's guest, Cliff Locks, has done exactly that. And from authoring 7 books to launching the Executive Ascent program, Cliff is on a mission to shape the next generation of multimillionaire leaders. Cliff, I'm so honored to have you here.
Ahmed, it's a pleasure. I just want to thank you to the great work you're doing with the Founder Circle podcast. Such a large global reach. And then if you look at the value that you bring in with Infinity Nine in helping the family offices and entrepreneurs, it's such a pleasure to be with you today and the listeners and provide value.
I really appreciate that. This is a subject that maybe is a little taboo, maybe untalked. And right before we were discussing, it definitely hit some of my funny bones that you mentioned. Let's talk about the next generation, the fiduciary responsibility we have of empowering and teaching the next generation to manage wealth.
I mentioned to you earlier, we have a fiduciary responsibility for the next generation. It's our children. And we want the best for them. So when you look at it, we have large influences within our industries, may it be associations within our own industry vertical, our social media presence. So us being positive and really speaking, in a positive affirmation for the next generation, that it's a privilege to be able to help them find internships and summer opportunities and shadowing opportunities, maybe pushing into some of the universities and sharing our wisdoms. It could be the MBA program. It could be in, some of the accounting functions, depending on what your expertise is. But I think taking the time to really think about it collaboratively, to really step up and be a great participant. When I look at it, yes, I've had the privilege of building or founding 3 companies and selling them, but it was always about the team. So when you start to really, you get reflective, after, you have these transactions, sometimes you'll take some time off, spend more time with your family. It creates some wealth, when you do an exit. So that's another positive for our listeners. If you understand, in my case, I build to sell. So I like to build a company with a vision of success is really the exit, but also looking after the teams to make sure that they have employment contracts. So again, the word clarity, I think, is a really, really important piece, getting our goals written down on paper, really finalizing, again, what that vision of success looks like for me as an individual or a C-level executive or a founder or an entrepreneur. One of the bases, I'm thinking back, one of my mentors, and a suggestion to our listeners is Brian Tracy. And Brian Tracy was very articulate on us writing our goals down. And one of the magical pieces of writing our goals down, and only 3% of the world has taken the initiative to write their goals down on paper. And yes, it's okay to use Word or Excel, whatever tools you want to use, but only 3%. But as we go through our day and we really think about, what yeses and nos to things we want to do or not do, if you took the time to write your goals down on paper, and it takes 15 to 20 minutes, you're in a position where subliminally, meaning we're not thinking about it, you're making these positive decisions to do certain things and not do other things based on what you wrote down as your goals. So the mind and the brain is sort of like a supercomputer. If we really think about, we're talking about generative AI nowadays. Well, internally, we have a supercomputer inside of us. We just need to feed it. You're from Miami, I'm up in Connecticut, and I say this to my kids and some of my team members. Feed your body. You're a Ferrari, you're a Lamborghini, you're a high-performing individual. You need to put high test in. So we're talking about, what we're reading, who we're interacting with, the idea of, are we getting aggravated? I wrote a book on mastering your anger. Okay, we don't need to be angry. You sort of get an aura ahead of time before you get angry, and it's an opportunity to rethink, do I really want to get angry? But that goal setting is such a foundational piece where, I'm an executive coach, a mentor, and I have clients all over the world. And without the written goals, I really don't want to put time into somebody, because how do you know when they're going to be actually fulfill what their vision of success is if they didn't take the time to write their goals? So if our listeners have a vision of success and they can articulate that on paper, it's easy to work from there backwards. What steps do we need to implement over what period of time? What team members are going to take a ride along with us? In what positions? What are we really solving? And then the other piece is, what do you really love to do? What are you really, really good at? It's got high margins, meaning it's profitable, and you get paid. Could we stay in that lane? And then actually in others, when you look at it, you got the ability to look at personas and avatars and who is our best customer and can we get lookalike customers. So there's some, when you're looking at the foundation of it, it's magical when you step back from the business and you take some time. Miami's beautiful. We take walks on the beach or some of the, nice hotels that are sitting there and the outdoor pools. You get a chance to think. If we're working, sort of on the business on top, or working in the day-to-day minutia in the business, we all need some time to get some clarity. And that means you got to step away from the business. And then one of the last pieces I'll share with you is how strong is our bench? Meaning, if you look at the team, me as the CEO or founder, can I step out of that role and let somebody else or the team run? Do they need me? So my goal in my life, because I build to sell, is always to make it where, as the founder, my whole sort of goal was the vision of success and then remove obstacles for team members. So I was hiring bright people. The goal was to overpay them so they stay and they play. Okay. And really look after the team where, there's a real wonderful ecosystem within that organization of serving our clients. And yes, we'd like to get overpaid by our clients. Okay, it's getting a little harder out there, but some of the generative AI tools used with engineered prompts can really help us to go in there and sort of filter what we're really, really, really good at, what services, pricing points, competitive, and, sort of landscape. Ask me some questions and I'll answer whatever you'd like.
I love it. You gave me a lot at the beginning, and let's try to go deeper into some of them, which really are interesting. What happens if we don't take care of our next generation?
If you look at the chaos that's in our society, and you want to leave it to the schools and the university to educate our young people, someone else is going to shape them. But if you look at the criteria of what it takes to be a professor or a high school teacher, did they ever run a business? Remember, our listeners are entrepreneurs. They're running businesses. So we look at things very, very different than somebody that's going to go in and take a career and get their master's degree in education. Have they really hired anybody? Have they had to make payroll? Have they ever really looked at the receivables within an organization? Sorting to look at that, the future, we have a multitude of individuals in our organizations. We know we have to make payroll. We always have accounts payable. We may be out there and we need to, and I call it dialing for dollars, meaning you got to get your receivables in. Some of my businesses I get paid prior to doing the service. So if you start to look at some of the fine folks out there, our listeners that are running a SaaS model, they got a subscription model there. When we do it right, we have very little churn and the cost of acquisition of a customer. But let's go back to the youth like you brought up. The youth knows nothing but digital. In other words, they grew up with a cell phone or a smartphone in their hands or some sort of a tablet or laptop, right? They're gamers. They're very, very bright, our young people. They just need some direction and some mentorship to help shape who they are. And I think that's our responsibility as, leaders, our listeners, and you and I, stepping up to take those roles and speak in positive affirmations. I'm on LinkedIn very, very heavily. You can look me up under Cliff Locks. And you'll see what I'm posting is really about uplifting individuals at this point, getting people to take responsibility for themselves and the learning piece. And your podcast comes in there and it's about learning. And that's the vibrantness about communities is the ability to do bi-directional learning. I learn from my clients. They could be in Dubai, they could be in Germany, they could be in Ireland, the UK, here in the States, the US. It's fun to be part of this winning environment of that long-term learning. And the gift is really the next generation, is to give and provide so they can build wonderful lives and build, families for themselves. The schools are not teaching our youth how to be wonderful moms and dads. And some of our parents may not know that. So when you're starting to look at, the mentorship and some of the questions and the quality of time we're putting together with the next generation, what's the characteristics of phenomenal dad, I've written a couple of books on that subject matter, and the legacy piece is, you need to spend time with your kids. You need to bring them forward.
You mentioned something that high net worth family offices, people that have built up generational wealth, then give it to the next generation and most of them lose it. It's a staggering statistic. And you said something about talking about money at the dinner table. how important is that? How do families should start talking about money? Why should they start talking about money? And also, how should they start to talk about money? Because this is a taboo subject, and not only do families don't talk to each other, but even spouses don't talk to each other. Number one cause of divorce in the world is finances, because you don't know who you're marrying because you don't talk about this stuff. How do you suggest we do that?
Ahmed, you're brilliant. This is such a wonderful conversation when you really look at how do we provide value to others. When we bring in the topic of business over the dinner table and we start to talk about the finances, our children are very, very articulate, meaning they learn really, really quickly. So, our habits of what we're doing is important to be a role model for them. So if we're comfortable in the subject matter of dollars, now, part of it, I've been on the board of directors for Boy Scouts, for 15 years at a county level, about 12,000 youth. And one of the merit badges in Boy Scouts was personal management. And that young person, could be 14, 15 years old, would have to ask their parents to help plan a major purchase. Maybe it's a car, maybe it's a TV, and go out there and research the pricing. Now, I would go a little further and I'd say over the dinner table with a young person, we need to talk about what's the cost to run the home. Let's talk about a mortgage. Let's talk about insurance. Let's talk about lawn care, utilities, really understand, what it is. $100,000 doesn't go very far. So again, when you're looking at the family office, we're usually talking to somebody with definitions. So a very high net worth individual is sitting with $10 million worth of assets or more without looking at their primary home. An ultra high net worth individual is at $30 million worth of assets, again, without their primary home. You brought up a very important piece. After the second generation, 60 to 70% of that wealth is gone. After the third generation, 90% of that wealth is gone. So the takeaway today, and I've written a couple of books on that subject matter, is if we really put the time and effort into discussing funding, and then say the business has been in the family for many, many years, so it may be multi-generational. I believe we need to really have that conversation about our grandparents if they started the business, okay? What were their foundation? Because sometimes you just get a box of pictures. Maybe there's some notes on the back of the picture. You really don't understand the foundation of the sacrifices and how the individual created the wealth within the family. So, when you're looking at that, I make a suggestion to our listeners. We could create a video. And the video continue to be added by the later generations on how we got started. So you're interviewing your parents or your grandparents, okay? And then the kids are getting interviewed later on, and they just keep adding to this. And it really provides the fiber of how did the family get started? Wealth is not an accident. Somebody was planning and executing. So
What a wonderful idea and homework, actually, to go to your parents, to go while they're living, while they're breathing, your grandparents, say, hey, can you tell me what made you successful? Or what mistakes did you make that you wouldn't want me to do? And what do you want me to teach our kids? Because that type of questions prompts generational wealth, which is not only money, but generational knowledge as well. And I think that's where there's such a big disconnect. And to your point of talking in the dinner table about your home is the best way to say no. I think people don't realize that if you say, "Hey, I can't buy you everything you want because look at everything we need to pay for." And after all that is paid, even if we do have an excess of money, we need to keep this up for 20 years. Like it's not, it's education. And I think that's so empowering and so pivotal to your main idea of why we need to talk to the next gen. We need them to understand the importance of wealth management, which is something that the school, like you said, is not teaching us. University is not teaching us. Something I do have a question for you is, how do you instill hunger, though? How do you instill someone to still have that drive? If they start finding out, hey, my family has millions of dollars, what do I need to do? Do I need to work?
When you have the privilege of having wealth, it gives you opportunities to experience additional, you could do some traveling, you may have private aviation, you may have multiple homes, but the foundations of what makes an individual happy is a key piece. To me, the takeaway is really if we create children that are entrepreneurs that can take assets and put them to work and hire people and be part of that ecosystem of building a business, they will quickly learn and be motivated. So they may be supporting, they may be an angel. So in my case, I have written 21 checks as an angel. So think about that, 21 investments, okay? Anything from hydrogen production using seawater without desalination to a wellness company about, I think we really have a responsibility to look in the mirror and say, look, who's responsible for our health is the individual reflecting back in that mirror. It's us. Right? Wellness is not an accident. It's, what are you eating? Are you getting aggravated? Are you working out? Exercise. You can't delegate those things. I mean, the dietitian or somebody that's cooking in the house could actually prepare meals that are healthy. But all that is a thoughtful process that you could take the initiative to own it. Without it, you're starting to look at wealth is not going to create wellness. Just think that for a little bit. So in your later years, all the abuse you may have done to your body is going to come out and reflect in your 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. So the quality years that you're looking for in your later years, where you have the wealth at that point, you want to enjoy your life, sort of what we've been doing to ourselves over those, the sort of the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s has an impact on what the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s look like. Now, you could reverse some of that, but you need to get educated on wellness. I belong to a company, I have 10% equity in the company of wellness. They're looking at healthcare as being perverse. So the doctors and the hospitals are getting paid when you're sick. Their incentive, the pharmaceutical companies, to keep you what? They don't make money.
Sick.
Yeah, sick.
Of course. A pill for life.
So the idea is if you want to look at this thing and you're like, look, going to the hospital is probably not going to have a good outcome. I mean, I'm an EMT paramedic as a hobby. Okay, so I have some medical background. Yeah, there's a need. People do some things, where, things get a little complicated. I mean, I've seen somebody get into an accident on a jet ski and break both femurs. And that bone is the strongest bone in your body, but both legs broke his femur. So there was a lot of G-forces being applied when this individual flew up over the handlebars on his jet ski. Again, doing something that you can have a wonderful time, but if you get a little excessive and you push the limits a bit, you're putting yourself at risk. So I'll give you some other ideas on wellness. We can do extreme sports. So let's talk about the next generation. They have assets where they can drive fast. I've gone skydiving. I've gone scuba diving. But I took the time to get trained by experts ahead of time before doing that and getting certified. Others are pilots, with many hours of flight time. It's just get the training you need so you can go out there and enjoy whatever your pursuit is. But don't assume you can go out there and just do it well. Get the training, get the education, take along other individuals that are experts at it and really enjoy the experience, but do it safely is the takeaway. So
I agree, and I think I will highlight and perhaps add a little bit to your takeaway, which is do it well, but doing it well takes a long time. Like you can't go with a pilot that has 100 hours. It never took 100 hours. It took 1,000, and it took maybe 10,000. And that is, I think, when I'll have kids is trying to teach them that even if they don't start from zero, it'll take them 10,000 hours to just start from wherever they're going to start. But it instill that long-term mindset of let's go. And that's a perfect segue to your second trigger that you gave me was the goal setting. That only 3% of people put a goal or can write it down. What as a coach, as a mentor, how do you help people write this down? Because I have this problem. I'll write a goal and I'll surpass it. I'll underestimate my goal. And then I'll write a huge goal and then I feel overwhelmed because I feel a little bit I wrote it too big or what's your method? How do you use it? How do you coach people to write these things down?
The wonderful part about a goal, let's just discuss that. You can have that large goal that you're looking for, but we also have the privilege of breaking it down into sub-deliverables, meaning multiple goals to reach that vision of success. So just give that some thought. You need a roadmap. In other words, we're going to do some travel by air, by boat. I'm a captain of a boat. Just All these needed the planning and the execution piece. If you don't have the planning, you just do the execution, you're probably going to have a challenge. I'll give you another example. A lot of us, they're our age, may be familiar with pinball. So you have a steel ball that's inside a machine, and you pull back the lever and it shoots the ball out, and you're racking up points. Okay, it comes down, it may go down the middle, or you have access to the flippers or go down the sides, and you could lose, or it could come back in and use the flippers to set it up. When you write your goals down on paper, you're actually planning and executing where that steel ball is going to go to ring up the points. Without the goal, you're just ringing up points and it's aimless. In other words, you're happy, you may be shaking a machine or something, but you're not really planning and executing. It's happening. Where if you write your goals down on the front end and you do the project management sort of on your goals and the sub goals, that execution piece is a hell of a lot easier. Plus, you get to measure some of the terms, KPIs or OKRs, or some of the initials people could look up using the generative AI tools to look at their situation. How do they set key performing indicators so they know they're on track? Excel is a wonderful tool. There's something called the Gantt chart. You can take a project, you could break it out by time and what needs to get done first and break it into sub. We can have an analyst do it for us, with a private, when we think about our private offices, the family office, we've got resources in-house that we can delegate and get reports back. But at the end of the day, we've got to take ownership of what that output is if we're going to implement something on our end. The team, it was great, but you brought something up important. So yes, you can make large goals. I'll give you another instance. I have a 32-year-old son. I got 3 kids. The 32-year-old wrote his goals down when he was 14 years old, and I just bumped into it about 2 weeks ago in a folder on a yellow legal paper. Now, this young man says he wants to be a billionaire. He was 14 years old. Where did he get that from? Okay, that's really a large thinking for a young person at 14. Somewhere along the line that must have come up. Okay. Now, at 32, his salary is very close to 7 figures on an annual basis. It's not an accident. Self-made. So I'm just trying to say to you, is the goals work? Yeah, it definitely works. If we have young children, will it work when they're back in 12 years old, 13, 14? The answer is yeah, it works really, really well. Remember, it's not our goals as the parents, it's their goals. The suggestion is the more color and detail that we can create in the writing of what we're looking to either create, participate in, the easier it is for the brain to go out there and help you accomplish that. So just give that some thought. You need a little bit of detail. So yes, you can have that large goal. So, when you look at somebody that wants to be a billionaire, well, he's probably going to have to build a sizable company and have an exit. Who's he selling to? Well, he's selling to the Fortune 100. Okay, it's an enterprise client. So again, you're going to have more opportunities to do something at a larger scale because he chose to go into something with a larger customer, a customer that could afford a larger fee base. That can support that. So, when you're looking at it, you can plan and execute. The generative AI tools are getting things to, hopefully our listeners, they can always reach out to me if you need some help or something. But, I own a couple of AI companies. And it's such a wonderful tool when we talk about something called agentic AI. So it's an intelligent agent doing some work. So we may have one of the agents could be a CFO role. Another one could be the COO role. Another one could be somebody that's responsible for sales. Another one could be for marketing. And you're creating this ecosystem. It's a virtual, in essence, entity there, but it's bouncing everything back and forth, and it's coming back out with this very thoughtful output that's executable. So, when you're looking at it, what does the future look like? Ahmed, there's going to be 5 or 6 of you out there. When you're sleeping,
For sure.
money, there's no question to it. We're heading into a situation where, some of the technology, we're not going to know what's virtual or real per se. I mean, most of us are going to be very honest when we're using AI tools and we're using, synthetic video, let's call it. So, but again, you and I could create a smart contract. We could release our agent out there to go out there and bring in clients and service them properly and handle the FAQs. Pricing models could all be AI. So when you're looking at 6 of you, you may have somebody there that is what? Could be our CFO. Could be somebody handling, the marketing and sales. but we're not involved in the day-to-day minutia of it. It's the agent that's doing the work, but it's reporting back to us, and we have some sort of a dashboard to keep an eye on it. But the smart contract means we have rails sitting on the right and left, like we're playing bowling in the early days with the children, for a birthday party. How they put the inflatable or something out in the gutters so the ball doesn't go into the gutter, and that would be sort of the smart contract to make sure things are, running the way they want.
I really appreciate your response on the goal setting as make them large. So I got that because it was like a goal should not be small. A milestone should be small. A sub goal or a in the way breadcrumb to take you to the big goal, but the goal should be big. And then your brain can organize to be there. And with this conversation going then to Gen AI and to AI agents, and you've been on both sides of the operational and visionary sides of companies. How do you balance those hats early on? And should we become more visionary now that we have all this AI power? Or do you still think that operationally we need to be involved?
When you look at a family office, the wealth was created maybe out of real estate, or they owned some sort of an industry, manufacturing, distribution, a 3PL, which would be third-party logistics. They own some sort of an entity at this point. There's an operational component to it. But when you're looking at the higher level on a quality of life, that vision of what you want to accomplish is a wonderful place, because the business really gives you the assets to be able to accomplish the quality of life, assuming you're in a wellness, your health is there and you're a positive, individual. The other piece, I'll just leave it for our listeners. I fix families. If you're running into a situation where the kids are not listening to you, they're not going to listen to the mom and dad. They're just not going to do it. Sometimes you need an outside force that will come in and listen and do the corrective action, and then behind the scenes debrief you, mom or dad, on what's taking place. And you get it. And then the major piece is really getting the young person to write their goals down on paper, and then sort of giving them the tools to be able to do that. Why it works so well, the meaningfulness, but it has to click. You get a different type of child when you write your goals down on paper, because they take ownership of their learning and what life looks like for them. You as a parent, you're in a position where you can guide that, but it is their life. And that's the fun part. What gives us great pride? Let's think about it. If the kids are doing well, they're self-sufficient, they're building amazing companies for themselves, you got grandchildren, they're doing well, quality time with the family, doing some traveling together, maybe going out into the golf course and enjoying nature. Just, what gives you pride? How about the team is doing well back at the company? I've written a couple of books, when we talk about leadership, here's a book that I wrote on empowering your leadership. We address AI in it. Okay. I wrote another book here, Essential Leadership Skills. Does it work? Yeah, it definitely works. So when you're talking about operational or a high level, I think the question is, when somebody started a business, somebody had a thought of something they wanted to build. The business will never be the same as when you started the company. It's going to pivot. And it should pivot to things that are going to be profitable and sustainable. Now, I learned a lot of this when I worked with the Hyper Accelerator program. We've run 7,200 entrepreneurs through a program, and they come out of over 50 countries. So it's a global program, and I've interacted with hundreds of entrepreneurs, and you get to learn really, really quick on the fiber, what makes an individual capable of being successful as an entrepreneur. And there's some characteristics in a lot of our listeners, the winners out there that have figured a lot. We have some skills. Are we a hipster, a hustler, or a hacker? So a hipster, a hustler, or a hacker. These are underlying characteristics. Now, the founder doesn't need to have them all. It could be the founding team. So when you're looking at the family office and we're building and we're helping the children and we're trying to figure out, you start to break it down. What skills does the child have? It may not be the oldest son that's going to take over the family enterprise. They may be missing some of these characteristics. All right. So that's going to create some stress in the family. All right. So, when it is, how do we help people, our young people move in a good direction so they feel fulfilled and money's not an issue? A family could have $100 million. Okay. It doesn't make the children happy. It creates situations where they can get themselves into trouble. Now, should we bail our children out? Let's talk about that. Okay. My kids, I says, you get yourself arrested, you're going to get yourself out of this thing. So they stayed on the straight and narrow because they chose to, because they knew there was going to be some ramifications that they were going to have to figure it out if they decided to get themselves in trouble. Okay. So, when you're looking at it, there's a lot of vices that are out there. It could be drugs and alcohol. Okay. How do we create an atmosphere where that's not playing a role? So again, we're starting to look at their friendships, the goals. What are they engaged in? Are we taking them to work? Are they engaged? Are we rotating them into different departments within our companies? Are they learning? Are they good people? Do they care about others? Paying it forward. Philanthropy. It's a wonderful opportunity to give back and learn more about an organization. But again, you got to be proactive to figure out, where are you going to donate your money? Are you going to take an active role, or just going to write a check? So remember, I took 15 years of my life, which was a privilege, to give back to scouting, okay, and touched, in essence, 12,000 youth. And we created created a STEM program, which would be out of Dallas, and we ran that in our program. In our backyard, we had Brookhaven National Laboratories, so it's a national lab. So when we run the engineering merit badge, I set it up, we run it at the lab. So now they're meeting engineers and scientists. These kids are bright. They just need opportunities to interact with other bright individuals to find where they fit. And it can be sports. Look, a well-rounded youth could be playing a musical instrument, could be swimming or baseball, whatever it may be that really they're passionate about, and can do scouting. It could be Girl Scouting, Boy Scouting, whatever it is. Just give some thoughts on what a well-rounded youth looks like. I'm not saying overprogram them with activities. Let's talk about getting them into some of the Ivy League schools. One of the takeaways from some of our, family offices at this point. It only creates an opportunity to be able to interact with other graduates from that university, and it's prestigious and you feel good about it. But today's university education is not what it used to be per se. So just give that some thought, for our, folks that are going to write these checks for these youth to go there. So, I have a daughter that graduated from Columbia University with her master's degree. I was a little blind on the ambiance that was taking place in that campus. Okay. Now she's into social work, which is great. She really is about adoption, helping families adopt a child or have, made it in vitro and help in that space. And she's a very giving individual, but I didn't realize the dynamics in that campus. So I think the parents need to look at what's the dynamics inside that campus versus just the Ivy League degree. Sorry about the calls. The ability to really dig in a little deeper on the career planning. So when we look at the goals for a young person, they start to figure out what their goals will be. The career could sit in that particular space and help define that. So if you get a young person in high school is figuring out, maybe it's more chemistry or biology, it's more in the writing skills, or they're deeper into the math and they love coding or the AI, the generative AI tools, that career planning allows the young person to become successful in some sort of a vertical and feel confident about it. So when they go to, say they're going to go to the university, they can study more pristinely in that field and become more of an expert. Again, staying engaged. Now, as parents, the suggestion is not to force them into law or a CPA or something. It's more of, where's their strengths? We can always go back to that hipster, hustler, or hacker, and the hacker would be somebody who writes code. It's just, trying to figure out what their characteristics are and then help them move in a very, very positive direction. I'll show you some other things. Here's a book here I didn't share with you earlier, but the idea is we want our children to thrive. We want to be proud of the family legacy. Here's another book. Here are key strategies to raise wonderful children. It's not an accident. It's a plan and execution piece. Okay. Can we, other things, it's the team members. How do we achieve success fast? It's not hard. It's really the goal setting, by the way. That's the foundation of being able to do it on the execution piece. Are there a lot of people running around angry? The answer is yes. Do they need to be angry? The answer is no. Okay.
So I get, and I love the answer because it's very much strategic. You just showed me how much you think for things to happen in a certain way. And it's like you said, your children, you cannot make them become a lawyer or become a doctor, but you can help them find, you can think about their strengths. You can help them discover them so that they make the right decision. And you tell them, if you don't, if you dig yourself to a hole, you have to climb out. It makes it's a very incentive based. It's a very smart way to get. I don't think the word is influence, but it's the word should be like educate and sort of like go with them to success. There's something that you mentioned that is ringing my curiosity bell, which is when you work with so many entrepreneurs and yourself being a very successful entrepreneur with 3 exits, what does it really take to create a repeatable, successful business across multiple companies?
Foundation, I had brought up earlier, what do you love to do? What are you really, really good at? Now, why my clients love me so much is I'm a futurist, meaning I'm always looking 3, 5, 15, 20 years out. And I'm bringing that thoughtful process forward. And it may be some of the companies I have equity with, and I'm working with the tools they're building. A lot of it, let's say a lot of it is the generative AI tools. Let's just be straight with each other. I own 10% of multiple companies in AI. The brilliance of trying to get multiple successes is really that planning piece and looking out. In other words, what are we building? Who are we building it for? What problem are we solving? What kind of financial margins are in there? Okay. Who's going to be our client? We're going to go after a bunch of entrepreneurs that are struggling economically, or are we going to go after SMB? Maybe they're doing 5, 10 million or more, or we're going to go after the enterprise that are doing billions of dollars. So it's a mix. So where did I learn this? I had retired for a couple of years after I sold my last company to a Fortune 5. And I sold it to KKR. So it's, one of the larger Crafts' organization. It's a large PE, I guess they really venture capital too, and it was a privilege to work with their team. Really understanding the foundation of what creates sustainable organizations that last for decades. A lot of it is the team, the training that's in place. And then the other side of it is when we go in and we want to solve something. If we think about real estate, there's cycles. We had multifamily and it got out of hand at some point. Some folks were buying real estate and it wasn't self-cash flowing. And that creates some challenges. One of the companies I'm on the board, we have software. It's a SaaS platform, and it takes in real estate that's off the market, meaning it's not for sale at this point. And it puts it into a database, and it actually looks at the pricing model on that particular. And then it also looks at how much CapEx or improvements do we need to make in that property and how the rent roll could come up. And then also when to exit. So think about it. It's a smart tool. We haven't pulled the trigger on any kind of purchases, but it's putting together these pro formas intelligently on what are we going to buy, and then who to communicate because it's off market, meaning who owns that property, okay? And then it's bringing in, is there a debt load sitting on that property? So again, when you're looking at it, what are the tools? The generative AI is making it easier and less of a threshold to create a business. It'll create a whole business plan. In other words, through the Hyper Accelerator program, I have, you and I would think about an engineered prompt. We think maybe it's a sentence, 2 sentences. I have ones that are 1.5 pages that I'm asking the AI to generate insightful plans, how to build a winning team, valuation pieces, the exit piece, sort of the competitive landscape. Some of us may be familiar with the SWOT analysis to really look at the strengths and weaknesses. Again, the generative AI will generate these insightful reports, plus it can create the citations, meaning where did it get that data from? So the takeaway is, yes, you need to read before you send because it does hallucinate, meaning it makes things up. It's not making things up that frequently. So the engineered prompt is in a position where a lot of that challenge that others would run into can be corrected. We want to ask it a medical question. Tell them in other words, tell the AI that you're a seasoned 30-year-old physician, an expert, head of medicine in some sort of a university that's close to you. And ask the question you have. It'll come back out with that information. It's not going to be FDA approved, and you need to do your own due diligence and research. But I'm saying to you, you're giving it the formation of the expertise, and it's going to give you output based on that person being an expert in the large language model. So just give that, I'm running a $100 million organization. I'm thinking about doing an acquisition. Okay, my business does this. What can I bolt on to my company that will make it easy on the integration piece, meaning onboarding that team and that company, Again, we have systems, computer systems that may have to come together. We've got the accounting function. So just, to really look at what's involved to make sure the analysis we did on the front end before we did the acquisition, those numbers will actually come to fruition after the close. So, it's interesting how the tools are out there. They're easy to use. It's not a very large learning curve after you put the time into it. But realize if you're a pilot, you're a captain of a boat, you're jumping out of planes or something, with a license, or you're scuba diving, you took the time to become an expert at something. AI is no different. And for our listeners, if you do 3,500 hours of something, you're pretty close to an expert. Just give that some thought. So again, when you're talking to the kids, they have this instant gratification in 6-second attention spans. So when you're trying to figure out what are they going to be good at in the career planning, you're looking at, hey, there's a lot of, let me phrase it this way. We've got about 13,000 messages that come to us per day between phone calls, social media, emails. I don't know if you've been watching TV or something. Just think about all that's coming in at us, and you have to filter it. A young person knows nothing but digital, so they're online very, very heavily. It could be on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. So they're getting a lot of feeds coming in. So for them to find what they really love to do, they're going to need some guidance from the parents. But again, I didn't say tell them what to do. I said guidance. So when you get them to ask insightful questions, you can help sort of firm that up. So, I'll give you one other, example. I have a son, my second son, my youngest child. He's an engineer. Well, the Boy Scouts, he took the engineering merit badge and really enjoyed it. So in scouting, there's 125 different merit badges. It was all about career planning. So scouting is about career planning. Yes, there's first aid, learning how to cook and enjoy nature and safety and wellness, okay, and teamwork, and, but at the end of the day, the merit badge program was all about trying to figure out your career. So yeah, there's one for law, there's one for enterprise, there's another one for entrepreneurship, there's computers, so when you're looking at it, there's nuclear science, there's a multitude of badges, and he latched on to the engineering badge. So again, the relationship with Brookhaven National Lab, had an internship there working on a particle accelerator, $300 million project, okay? Got his bachelor's and master's at Stony Brook University. It's a state school. It had a better education than many of the other private schools for engineering, okay? Interesting. And then from there, he goes out and works for Northrop Grumman in sonar, things that get attached to a submarine or a ship. It's on his LinkedIn, so I'm not worried about, things that we should be talking about. And then takes a job now working on jet engines for Pratt Whitney. It came from a merit badge in scouting as a 15-year-old.
You're wonderful.
Yeah, he loved Legos. So just think about, what are the kids' strengths? How do we build? How do we open opportunities and stuff? Did I ask somebody, hey, how does my child get an internship at a national lab, at Brookhaven National Lab? Yeah. So I took the initiative. I opened the door. He's got to walk through the door, sell himself, and stay in the position. But it's okay, moms and dads. You can open up doors for these kids. You may not want to bring them into your own company initially. It's okay. You could ask one of your associates, could be a vendor or a client, to take your son and put him under his wing. Look, one of the things I had suggested, because I was the host of the Private Equity Profits podcast. So that's a private equity podcast. A lot of the private equity firms will take your son or daughter and put their arm over their shoulders and mentor them. You may write a check for $1 million, $5 million, $10 million. It doesn't mean, what I'm trying to say to you is they'll help mentor your young person into an entrepreneur and really understand what a pro forma is and how we do the due diligence on a deal. And you as a father or a mom, you may be too close. And they may not listen to you. So just give some thoughts that, we live in an ecosystem. And there's a lot of like-minded people that really care about your children. All right. You just have to ask.
This is a wonderful, and I love the word guidance, and a wonderful guidance and guide to how to do things. Like if you want to scale your company, you have all these tools. If you want your kid to know what to do, there's programs and there's community, there's people to reach out. Let's zoom out a little bit into something that I'm very curious about as well, is your investing philosophy. How do you, because your mind is, I believe in an abundant mindset and that you can put in as much as you want, and it's incredible how much information you can process, but at the same time, if you don't focus, it's harder to go deeper. How do you look at investing for your own portfolio and also your on your mind? Because you, like you said, you went from like hydrogen all the way to AI companies. That's very wide. How do you manage that?
When you go in and you have our listeners, a self-talk about yourself, where your passion is, the hunger of knowledge. I love blogs, I love reading, I love LinkedIn. In other words, putting some time into some thoughtful output that's coming out through select individuals that are providing value. I have a large library sitting behind me, and another bookcase sitting here. I enjoy reading. I joined a angel group called Angel Fire Ventures. So Angel Fire Ventures, living on Long Island, where I lived, for 30 some odd years, which is in New York State, outside New York City, about 90 minutes. There, you brought something up really, really well, Ahmed. I didn't have the expertise in the multiple verticals per se, but each one of the individuals in the angel group were experts in their area. And deal flow would come through where we could write a check, okay? And somebody in the group knew that really, really well, that field extremely well, and they could do the due diligence. The other piece of it is one of the managing directors of the Angel Fire Ventures is sitting on the New York Angels, which would be a larger angel group in New York City. So we're looking at some of the deal flow that's coming out of the angels in New York Angels. And it allowed us to, again, they have experts because it's a larger group of angels with that expertise. Somebody in the angel group is going to sit on their board, okay? So somebody has that domain expertise. With the hydrogen, I spent a lot of time really going in and looking at where would I become an expert on hydrogen. So it came out of some of the national labs, not Brookhaven National Labs, but another couple of the other that work on energy. Okay, so I'm in the webinars on that. I'm sitting in the webinars for the electrical utilities to keep the power on, and I'm learning on what their needs are. And storage is one of the pieces of it. We look at green technology. Some folks are very much into it. Others are, questioning it at this point. I'm looking at really what the energy mix is, meaning I think we should have, if we can use scrubbers for coal, I don't have a problem with it. It's not polluting. You can actually capture the influent at this point. And the carbon that's being captured could be used to create other products. Natural gas. It's a wonderful renewable source in essence. I have no problem with big turbines or solar, but again, if the wind's not blowing or the sun's not on, you're not creating power. Okay? Europe, in the EU, for months, they had a problem where there was not enough wind to generate the power for running those turbines. And they wanted to shut off their nuclear. They wanted to get away from natural gas. They wanted to get away from coal. And, at that point, you got to think about it a little bit. Again, you need that domain expertise, and you're starting to look at, can you talk intelligently on the subject matter?
So that's a great opportunity for people to help each other and leverage each other's expertise. And when someone says, "Hey, I found something that I know everything about and it's good, I recommend this to you." But when you write a check, is it because do you want to be affiliated? Do you want to have the knowledge, or is it a capital preservation? What motivates you
What
to write
motivated
that
me?
check?
It's assessing the founders. What are they really solving? Is it going to be that team? Are they going to be able to solve it? I mean, I've had 9.5 times my money. I'm working on something right now. It probably affects, knock on wood. It's crazy. I have not lost any money. That's really unusual. So don't our listeners should not take that for granted. All right. So I'm an investor in Buffer. So if you wanted to post in social media, you could create one post and it's posting it out to 13 different social media channels. Okay, I was one of their first investors, but it came through the Angel Fire Venture Group. Okay, now he's doing 200 million annual reoccurring revenue (ARR). 200 million. He doesn't want to sell the company. He's not paying dividends. So just think about that a little bit. I didn't lose money, but I didn't make any money. Okay, so again, what is a good deal? Are you building to sell, understanding sort of what they're looking to accomplish? Is there going to be an exit? What's the timeline of tying up the financial money in that organization? So, I think passion is a major piece of it with due diligence. What do you really enjoy wanting to do a deep dive on? And then with a family office, you may have some fine folks that are sitting within your network inside there that's very, very knowledgeable on verticals. So you could diversify there. You could be, you may be working with financial planner. You know, some of the folks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that investing is one of those very personal questions that no one should follow anybody else's, but very think about how they want to attach their wealth to protect it, but also, like you said, a passion. What are you interested in? How do you want to be part of it? And understanding that not all deals are to exit, like the case of Buffer, it might be by design. It might be an interesting way to protect capital, but others need to be in and out. So I think it's been a wonderful conversation, Cliff. Thank you so much for sharing so much knowledge, much more than I expected, and definitely surpassed. Like, I'm gonna have to watch this again a few times and maybe down the road to see, what did Cliff say about children? What did Cliff say about leadership? What did you say about money? So thank you again for joining
Ahmed, it's
us,
been a
and
privilege.
always welcome.
Your listeners can find me on searching for Cliff Locks, LOCKS, on, you know, if my books are on Amazon, you just Google courses with my name, you'll find me. And on LinkedIn, I'm happy to connect and add value to anyone's lives. And in fixing families, I'm really, really good at it. It's amazing, you know, and it gives me great joy when families are together and they enjoy the quality and the love. And it's hard, you know, you're running a business, you're running a family, you got a family office, you're getting pulled in multiple directions. But at the end of the day, your legacy is the kids.
Absolutely. I will definitely put all of these on the description so that
Right.
everybody can find you easily.
Okay. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you,
Thanks so
Cliff.
much. It means a lot.
Pleasure and pleasure as well.
Be well.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.